All right, hello everyone. I'm Mystery.
And I am Mortimer the Authenticator, and welcome to the Duality of Man.
Today we're discussing the duality of men and women because there was a woman named Norah Vincent who was a lesbian feminist who did a book called The Self-Made Man, in which she chronicled her time posing as a man in society for, I believe, a year and a half,
Yeah,
18
she
months.
was also, if I'm not mistaken, a sociologist, and she essentially intended this as a kind of sociological experiment.
Yeah, and this was not a half-assed experiment. She went all out. She had a makeup artist to do her look as a man to really try and make her look as masculine as possible. And also, she employed an acting coach to try and get down, the way men walk, the way men speak, to really try and blend in as much as possible.
Remember when both academia and the arts had actual merit to them? I remember. Pepperidge Farm remembered, but apparently academia and Hollywood don't fucking remember when such things were a thing.
All right, so when Nora, who went as Ned, was trying to infiltrate male spaces, she joined a bowling league. And one of the things that she believed is that because she was not a good bowler, they would, reject her, make fun of her, you know, basically mock her for failing to do something as a
She
man.
was
And
she was expecting the men of feminist imagining, and they did not show up.
yeah, I mean, she was not only a feminist but also a lesbian, so she really knew nothing about men.
Which one has to wonder how much her lesbianism related her to feminism, because honestly, in my experience, particularly the masculine presenting lesbians or the butch lesbians really have a hatred for feminism because they know women well enough to know that the dynamics described in feminist theory are bullshit, or at least a lot of them. The other percentage of them are the dyed in the wool lesbians who are so, um, for lack of a better word, misandrist that they buy what feminism is selling hook, line, and sinker. I'm not sure where on that spectrum Nora was. Maybe somewhere in the
I mean,
middle.
well, certainly afterward, she was not a misandrist.
Yeah, I'm not sure where her starting position was, because I imagine if her starting position was, you know, all the way over in the feminism can do no wrong camp, she could have proceed she could have proceeded to do the intellectually dishonest, cognitively dissonant thing and reframe her experiences along the lines of feminist theory, which she didn't do. So maybe she was just somewhere in the middle, and then she
The way I think it was
it
is
strikes
that,
me that one way or the other, she was intellectually honest enough and actually academically meritorious enough that when she was presented with the data, she conformed her beliefs to the data rather than the other way around.
yeah, I think the her starting position was closer to she doesn't hate men, but finds that they are lacking.
Yeah, she doesn't really understand men, and I imagine, in part at least, she went to feminist theory and gender studies to understand these things, only to find that the understanding of things that she got from this was not in any way logical, humanitarian, or reflective when the rubber met the proverbial praxis road.
So the men in the boxing, in the not boxing,
Bowling.
bowling league, yeah, they pretty much accepted her. Although they did suspect that she was hiding something, they maybe thought that Ned, the man that she was portraying, was gay because she could not erase her femininity completely. So they saw Ned as just an effeminate man.
She was an atypical man, but she was still the beneficiary of male camaraderie. Is the long and the short of it.
Yeah. So they would bowl, they would, talk, shoot the shit. But it wasn't until that she revealed that she was actually a woman that like the final barrier to camaraderie was really lowered. she thinks it's because her conclusion was that, you know, men aren't comfortable opening up like around themselves to this level, which is why they, which is why the guy mentioned about his wife's cancer to me only after I revealed myself to be a woman. But the way I read it, however, is that they knew that you were deceiving them in some way. They didn't know
They,
what it
they,
was,
they,
but they
their
knew that you weren't being
their
completely
bullshit
honest with
meter
them.
was going off, and so they kept their distance.
Yeah, they knew you weren't being completely honest with them. So how can they be completely honest with you?
Yeah, it's a social reading thing, and it's something that men and women do instinctively around each other, and also around the in group. Even if you find that a individual is hiding something or is being duplicitous in some way, or is even just um setting off some instinctive alarm bells, you always keep your guard up, because there's a theory, and I find this theory to be largely valid. It's an instinct um that involved that evolved around predators back when we were still in our, just out of the trees but not yet in the cave phase, that stuck around largely because of mental illness, and in particular what we would now refer to as cluster B personalities, i.e., people documentedly get the willies around narcissists, sociopaths, and even borderlines to some degree, because it looks like a human, it walks like a human, but there's something in the machinery there that's just not freaking right, and it's setting my predator response off.
Yeah, that's why people call Mark Zuckerberg a robot.
Because because largely, I think in his case, because of autism more than anything. And to be fair, autism does also trigger something analogous to this sort of predator response, because we, again, it's a factor of subtle social cues, set cues, and even, if you buy into the metaphysical side of it, energetic cues that autists and people on the cluster B personality spectrum, for entirely different reasons, mind you, just don't have. In the case of autists, it's because they just don't have the machinery um, to function in that sphere. And in the case of cluster B personality disorders, it's because that sector of their brain is literally damaged, usually by some kind of trauma or way in life.
I think it could be a response to, telling when somebody's a threat or not. Like, this person, he's behaving oddly. He could be a threat to me or my
Again,
children.
the theory that I find to have the most merit goes that it's a holdover and a refinement from the predator response back when we were just out of the trees but not yet in the cave, where we would have to live alongside various predator animals like wolves and tigers and saber-tooth omai and so on.
I mean, true, but human beings are social creatures, and we're reading this not in some, foreign, enemy or predator. We're reading this in someone that's supposed to be a member of the same
No,
tribe
but
as us. So,
that's what I'm saying. I think that not only did we keep that instinct when it was no longer strictly speaking necessary, but we also refined it, as is usual among what we understand of intelligence. You usually keep whatever is still functional for you evolutionarily, and if it's truly evolutionarily useful, it'll even become more refined and more attuned as time goes by, because that's just how intelligence and neurology work. And I think that might be kind of the sort of genealogy, or the roots of this. It started as the predator response and got mingled in with the social instincts of being a social species, and eventually landed in the, oh my god, I just have an intuitive sense that that person gives me the heebie-jeebies because there's something in their machinery that's not fucking right. Sense. and it's useful. So of course we kept it because those that don't get stabbed in the middle of the gut by the sociopath of the tribe tend to be the ones who stand who send on their genes more, and those that blindly trust the sociopath or the social atypical person of the tribe often wind up dead because they trusted the sociopath, and that usually winds up with them being dead. Evolution is a hard master, but it is fair. God damn it!
One of the things I would mention again is that they suspected something about him. They suspected that she was gay. Well, she was a lesbian, so they were right in that respect, but not in the way they thought. But it's important to note that even when they thought that he was in the closet, they didn't reject him at all, but they just still didn't
And they also
open
didn't
themselves
push
up
the
fully.
issue either. They didn't
Yeah,
try to confront him about it or anything. Him, in air quotes, for the purposes of the at their knowledge at the time.
yeah. So I think that's a very important thing, and I think that a lot of feminists think that that stereotypical men are homophobic, which is something that I really just don't get.
Okay, I can understand it to some degree, but as usual, the justification in feminist theory and the justification in actuality, i.e., in actual documentable history, are completely ass backwards and at cross purposes with each other. The feminist understanding of why men often are unsettled by gay men is ew, they're feminine, therefore they're not proper men, and therefore ew. But in actuality, and in most historical cultures, the reason for being unsettled by gay men was two reasons. One, because to be a gay man was to be a man who didn't love women. And we are an inherently gynocentric, woman loving species. So, ew. And two, there was the fear, a irrational but not entirely instinctually unviable fear, that if this man likes men, then I'm not sexually safe around him because he might try to rape me. Now, mind you, in my opinion, both of these vectors are fucking wrong, and I'm speaking as
I mean,
a man who
they're
is
only wrong until
bisexual but gay to the point of all but name, basically.
the second one is only wrong until you get to prison.
Well, okay, but in prison, you don't even have to prefer men or have any sexual proclivities toward men to wind up in that position because any port in a storm, basically, um, for lack of better phrasing.
Let's see, we have a message from Nelson the Gentleman. I love. I'm not reading out that comment, Nelson.
Okay, I will read it quietly in my own head so that we don't get some yanked from YouTube. Also, hello Nelson. It's been an age since you've been on any of the things. So, hello. Um.
So
Anyway,
one thing.
um,
Um, sorry, you talk. Did you have
Nelson.
anything to say here?
It, no, I was just reading Nelson's comment. Nelson. Um. It, remind me to make sure you never ever buy lotion of any kind because hmm, just no lotion for you. You are forbidden from buying lotion ever again. With that comment, Nelson.
Subtle Silence of the Lambs reference.
Yeah, we're not even letting Nelson buy lotion because things. Um.
But
a-
one
Anyway,
interesting part of the
back
experiment
back
that
to
I think you'll actually find hilarious was when she tried dating as a man. Because if there's one thing that women do not know, it's how to pick up women as a man. Like they just seem to be utterly inept at
Well, no,
male to female relations.
it's a difference in framework. The like female and in particular feminist understanding of men, or the incredibly gynocentric woman understanding of men, the feminine understanding of men, is different. It's a different abstract construct than the way men actually think, because essentially people have beliefs about what other people believe, and they confuse what they believe other people should believe with what they actually believe. That's the fundamental thing.
Um, have you heard of a podcast called Fresh and Fit?
I have heard of it. I've never sullied my time or retinas with watching it, but I've heard of it.
I've watched some of it. Occasionally, I get bored at work,
Uh-huh.
but they often have women on there who they will give a scenario to, where the women will have to try and be a man and try and do what they think would attract a woman, and it's always hilariously bad because the moment they open your mouth, you know that what they're saying would never work in 1,000 years.
I think the issue there is they think it should work because because not only do extremely gynocentric, extremely feminine women or feminist women have a abstract understanding of how men operate, they also have an abstract understanding of women in general and or themselves. And they're not so good at this philosophical thing we call knowing themselves very much. You know, the old adage of know thyself. Ideologues in particular aren't very good at that because they filter everything through what should be the case in the abstract rather than actually addressing the inherent logic or the inherent data. So
I wouldn't even think these women on this podcast were ideologues. They were just delusional and narcissistic.
well,
They
unfortunately, the line in between those with our culture, given that most of our institutions are at least soft core feminist, um, is very fine at this point.
Yeah, so back to Nora. She thought that she would be able to get women not only because she was herself a woman, but because she was a lesbian. So she's used to dating women. So she thought that this is going to be easy. It was not. She described it as being cold, unwelcoming, terrifying, and extremely judgmental. And I gotta say, that's only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, welcome to being a bad one. I mean, I don't want to be callous, but speaking even myself as a bisexual dude who mostly prefers dudes, you are not wrong. This for I think every human male on the planet with any sexual proclivities whatsoever or any like social proclivities whatsoever of the opposite sex knows exactly what you're fucking talking about.
So I actually have a quote from her book. Um, it says, "Dating women was the hardest thing I had to do as Ned. Even when the women liked me and I liked them, I never felt more vulnerable to total strangers, never more socially defenseless than in my clanking suit of borrowed armor. But then I guess maybe that's one of the secrets of manhood that no man tells if he can help it. Every man's armor is borrowed and 10 sizes too big, and beneath it, he's naked and insecure and hoping you won't see." I mean, I would say that
Huzzah! They can be taught.
yeah, like when men are young and just starting out, that's exactly how it is because like they're just venturing into this like she was. They don't know like what women want. Like they don't know how to speak to women, and everything that they've been told about how to get a woman or how to date women is basically a lie.
Or a half truth buried in so many layers of abstraction that any utility it had was dead 500 years ago. Um, but that's not it. But that's neither here nor there. I would go so far as to say that even experienced men don't have that. Um, don't have security to the level that I think feminists or extremely gynocentric women think they do. I think to some extent, everyone is always in, to use Nora's phrase, a suit of borrowed armor. It's just that the men with experience get better at maneuvering in said borrowed armor. Um, I don't, because I do think that, and one of the reasons I am such a fervent men's rights advocate is I think that regardless of what feminists want you to believe or what extremely gynocentric feminine women want you to believe, um, men are treated in many ways exactly like the slave and servant underclasses of history have been. Um, and women, in many ways, are as treated like the aristocracy as their cultures can afford to make them. Which means that if there are any luxuries to be had by any given society, it's a women first, then children, and then maybe men if we have extra resources.
Yeah. See, another quote. This one again is about dating. I was boring myself. That's the worst part of a date. It makes you feel like a toad, and you keep telling yourself, I know I'm more fun than this. And I know that when I came into this cafe, I wasn't in despair about the human condition.
Again, I keep running the Robin Williams genie quote through my head. Huzzah! He can be tossed.
Yeah, it's just whenever you're dating, small talk is very hard when you're trying to build a connection to somebody. You have to try and come up with a topic that you think that they're interesting in, and when you're going in blind, like you're basically shooting in the dark. You're basically throwing out topics, trying to hope that that will connect with them, when you have no idea like what's hiding in the dark.
And here's the fundamental thing that I wish would get talked about more. When you go to date someone, you're usually already placing yourself in a subordinate position, because if you're dating someone who you consider worth dating, if you think that they are inherently valuable to some degree, and if you think that someone is inherently valuable and that you have to earn their affection, then that means you're already placing yourself in a subordinate position of having to earn the affections of someone you consider to be more valuable than yourself. I think that's a large part of why people are stiff on dates, is because you project all these positive attributes onto the person whose attention you're trying to obtain, and you also remind yourself, this is a worthwhile person. I have to earn their affection, which means you have to be on your best behavior lest you lose this valuable person that you've come across.
I think the amount of opportunities women now have to meet guys plays a massive part in it, because before a woman was basically limited to her own area of the guys that she could meet, but now with the internet and the fact that we can travel to more places means that she could potentially meet any number of guys, potentially any man in the country. And so she factors that into her calculations of saying, okay, there's literally 300 million people in this country, at least half of them are men. Why should I give this specific
Well,
one
I
my
don't even
time?
think I don't even think it's that mathematical. I think it's just a woman's standards are defined by who and what she is exposed to. So if she is exposed to the Herculean cream of the crop, the Giga Chads, and the the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of men, not just financially but also physiologically and personality wise, that will become her default understanding of what a man is. And so any man that fails to live up to at least those standards, the standards of the 1% of the 1% of the 1% in all vectors, are actually not men. Um, and that's where you get that's where you get the real man standard. The difference between now and the olden times is um, the most a woman could aspire to was the kind of men in like fairy tales and folk stories and so on. So your knights in shining armor, your John Henrys, your Herculeses, what have you. And sadly enough, if she could find a man within the 300 or so men that she had in her general vicinity who fits the majority of those criteria, she was like, okay, this is the best I can do. This is how this ideal correlates to reality. But because she now has because our intrepid heroine now has all of the men of human history and of every conceivable first world country to choose from, she can get closer and closer and closer to the ideal she has in her head, which means the amount of charity that she's willing to give mere mortal men, the other 80% of men, is less and less and less, and therefore the standard of what constitutes a real man becomes stricter and stricter and stricter.
I wouldn't even say you have to go back that far. I would say around the 60s or 70s, like a woman's standard was usually her own father. Like, like her own father would usually be a guy with a job who took care of his family, and so a woman would want to marry someone like that. But I think social media, because we know that social media has a much bigger effect on women than it does men. You know, when they see the extravagant lifestyle that some men are able to give their women, like that's what they seek out.
Well, okay, but the problem with only limiting it back to the 60s and 70s is we can see this same mentality ever since at the very latest the Victorian era, which is why women were such fans of bodice ripper novels, um, and other pulp romance novels of the day. Um, women have always been more fans of romance literature, both in the modern understanding of actual like pair bonding, but also in the old school medieval understanding of romanticization. Um, women were always literate women were always the biggest consumers of these kinds of literatures, and one of the reasons probably was the idealizing of both men and women in these circumstances. And we see that reflected in the modern day with the fact that women love things, even just outside of the dating market, strictly speaking, like, again, romance novels, or even in the modern era, romantic ASMR stories or fan fictions. I mean, the Tumblr phenomena is not just a modern thing. I think, as with most things, um, social media doesn't actually change anything. It just makes the natural proclivities of people easier to feed into and therefore exacerbates them slightly.
You know, that actually makes a great point of something that she mentioned in an interview I saw. She said that as a man, like she would occasionally go to strip clubs with other men, and that's when she really got a good look at male sexuality because, in her words, female
You wanted
sexuality was
unfiltered male sexuality? We will show you unfiltered male sexuality. Hold my collective fear.
yeah. She said that women's sexuality was mostly in the mind, whereas male sexuality was almost entirely from the body. Because I agree, like it is an actual urge that men have. I think any guy knows that if you haven't had release for a few days, you really do feel on edge.
Yep. Can confirm this.
Yeah, so it's like these guys weren't doing this because you know they really loved this activity, but like there's a biological urge like driving them to get some form of release, and since women control the barrier to sex, they have to, like, that's why places like strip clubs exist, so men can, get out this um urge when they can't get sex from, say, normal women.
It's even reflected to some degree in the difference between pickup artists and female dating strategies. Um, and I remember seeing the folks over at Honey Badger Radio, particularly Allison Tiemann, being very, very confused by female dating strategies because Allison, the very wonderfully literally minded person that she is, was expecting female dating strategies to be similar to. She was essentially expecting it to be female PUA, and PUA is very heavily focused on things like salesmanship. The difference, as far as I could tell, after watching a few live streams where they talked about this, and I was trying to figure it out because I wanted to help Allison understand it better, because I could kind of tell where she was getting it wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it for a while. And the same thing happened when I watched Base Fizz's or Zers's videos on it, and I finally think I figured out what it is. PUA pickup artists are salesmanship focused because they have to be, whereas and it's sort of a male role to sell oneself, whereas the difference between PUA strategies of dating and female dating strategies of dating is men are salesmen, or PUAs are salesmen and using salesmanship techniques, whereas women are doing what you could call comparative shopping. Like, have you ever seen those websites where you go to like compare different products and different features of different products together? That's
Yeah.
the difference. Women aren't selling themselves because they consider themselves to be the customer, whereas men are selling themselves because, instinctively at least, men consider themselves to be the product in need of being sold. So when women go courting, they are looking not for ways to sell themselves, generally speaking. They are looking for these are the qualities I want in this product that I'm looking for. Men are essentially to women in a lot of ways, at least in this comparison, a high end, high risk, high investment product. So they want a product with the greatest number of features. And I think that's also why the folks over at Female Dating Strategies hate the shit out of pickup artists, because they consider salesmanship techniques to be a kind of trickery. And so the very insinuation that the buyer can be bought or can be sold on a product that is inferior by using these tricks pisses off the women over at Female Dating Strategies, because in their
Here's the thing.
minds, you're a product, you need to convince me to buy you, and you shouldn't do so disingenuously.
All right, I have a number of thoughts. Number one, if you consider PUA to be trickery, you are never allowed to wear makeup again. Number two, I've watched a lot of these, guy goes out on the street to interview people, and a lot of them are about dating. And whenever they interview the women, like almost invariably, they rate themselves a 10, or they say, I'm the prize, or when they say, what do you bring to the table? They say, I bring me to the table. But it's like, okay, but here's the thing: none of the women who answer like this, they never can get the guy to stick around. Like
And
the
and this
guy
is
can
go ahead.
the guy can sell himself well enough to get what he's after, usually sex, but the women never have the qualities that the guy wants to actually make the guy stick around. Which is why I see a lot of videos of women who are like single moms complaining because they can never get a guy to stick around, and now they're like 35.
And this is once again a difference in framework. as we've said, I think even since the first episode of this show, the difference between female value or feminine value and masculine value is women are valued inherently for what they are, for their personhood and their emotions and their thoughts and feelings. Men are valued almost entirely as um as utilitarian, in a utilitarian sense of what can you do, what do you do, what are your what are your functions, what can you accomplish, i.e. women are valued inherently from the off. That's how they can get into this mindset of I'm bringing me to the table and that should be enough, while simultaneously judging men for, well, he doesn't do these things. And again, and this once again clicked in my head and made me clarify my previous point. It's it's like it's like the difference between Fabergé eggs or art pieces and appliances. Art pieces are placed on a pedestal and venerated simply by virtue of their inherent qualities. Appliances are only seen as valuable for what they can do. And in some ways,
and
I
if it
think,
breaks, you get a new one.
yeah, and I think you can see that again reflected in um, PUA versus female dating strategies. Um, Men are salesmen because they consider themselves to have a product that they need to sell, and they know to some degree that women are looking for these features in a given man, so they hone themselves to those particular features. Whereas women, again, think of it like those comparative websites where you can compare different appliances that, they might be expensive appliances and they might require a great degree of investment, like say a vacuum cleaner or a high-end coffee pot or what have you. But that's all the more reason to be selective with your purchasing and compare the one with the best features and the most bells and whistles to make sure you get the bang for your buck. That's the difference. Women are shopping for appliances, men are salesmen. In in
The thing
the
is, like,
in the dichotomy of PUA
even if a
versus
guy
female
proves
dating
that
strategy.
he is, even if a guy proves that he has value, and a woman select him, like they get married. Like if a guy has a downturn in his career and all of a sudden he's not bringing in as much resources as he used to, like she'll
Yeah,
divorce
the
him.
appliances
Even
break.
even though that she knows that he is capable of succeeding and that he's just going through a rough patch, she'll still dump his ass.
I bought this high-end vacuum cleaner because it had all these extra features, and now all the extra features have stopped working. Well, I guess it's time to throw this one out because I could take it to a vacuum cleaner repair salesman, or I could try to fix it myself, but I could just as easily buy another vacuum cleaner. It was an expensive thing to buy to begin with, but I bought it and now it's not working. So meh. And I don't like using that analogy, but you see how once I hit on this distinction between FDS um and PUAs, I was like, I think I might be onto something here because it works in no matter how many ways you look at it, it still functions as a um metric for comparison.
There's another quote I want to read, just typing out a comment. See, dating women. Let's see. No, that was see, wrong quote. Let me find it. See, ditto for the stereotype about men monopolizing conversations. Like Sasha, many of my dates, even the more passive ones, did most of the talking. I listened to them talk literally for hours about the most minute, mind numbing details of their personal lives. Men they were still in love with, men they had divorced, roommates and coworkers they hated, childhoods they were loath to remember, yet somehow found the energy to recount ad nauseum. Listening to them was like undergoing a slow frontal lobotomy. I sat there stunned by the social ineptitude of people to whom it never seemed to occur that no one, much less a first date, would have any interest in enduring this ordeal. Rambling women are the freaking worst.
But see again, it goes back to I am inherently valuable, therefore me giving you this information on myself is a gift to you, and if you have a problem with it, then you are the broken toy that I must get rid of.
Yeah, because men put themselves through all this basically emotional torture because we literally have no choice. Because unfortunately, that's just the way the world is, and if we don't, then we are
And
doomed to be
sadly enough,
alone.
instinctively, once again, we are gynocentric, so we are inclined to think to ourselves, maybe she is better than me, no matter how many glaring flaws appear in the marble.
Let's see, it was the woman's job to be on the defensive because past experience had taught her to be. It was the guy's job to be on the offensive because he had no choice. It was that or never meet at all. That's another quote.
And this is why there is such an expanding divide between men and women in this day and age, because women have bought into this framework whereby they are oppressed and vulnerable to everything that men can do, whereas men have no choice but to function as they always have, because again, an appliance that doesn't function is useful to no one. An art piece that doesn't function is valuable to everyone.
Yeah, she mentions more about the way women about what women expect of men. She says, if women are trapped by the whore Madonna complex, men are equally trapped by this warrior minstrel complex. What's more, while a man is expected to be modern, that is, to support feminism in all its particulars, to see and treat women as equals in every respect, he is, on the other hand, often still expected to be traditional at the same time, to treat a lady like a lady, to lead the way and pick up the check. So they want us to basically give them all the privileges while also wanting us to view them as our equals.
To be fair, there is a similar degree of cognitive dissonance among feminist women, because what you have there is a difference between what your instincts want you to do and what your cognition wants you to do. Because cognitively, i.e., in their conscious mind, in their like personal realm of will, they believe in all the feminist gobbledygook. But instinctively, because evolution is a hard master, they're still hypergamous. They still consider themselves inherently valuable, no matter what they do or do not do. Um, and they still consider men to be valuable for what they do rather than who and what they are. And so they need to find a way of squaring the circle of, I believe in all this feminist ideology, but my instincts still drive me to do these very, very traditional. And you could even go so far as to call them free traditionalistic tendencies, because in honest truth, what we consider traditionalism in the modern era isn't actually what tradition was. Um, Traditionalism in the modern era is very highly tied together with evangelicalism, which only really started to take off in the last couple centuries. Um, but that's the circle they have to square. Cognitively, they want X. Instinctively, they want Y. They're not going to stop instinctively wanting Y because instinct wins the fight. But they're also not going to stop cognitively believing X because they believe it's actually true. So they have to find some way of bridging that gap. And that's
I
why
don't know if it's
feminist women are often
necessarily.
so fucking miserable, because they believe one thing in the moral abstract and a complete separate thing when the rubber meets the instinctive road.
Well, here's the thing. I don't even know if it's necessarily instinctually. I think it's more like women know that this is what they are supposed to believe in modern society, but in their own thoughts, they don't admit to the wider world. They're saying to themselves, "I want a traditional man." It's not
No, I
necessarily instinctual, but I think it's just they know that this is the thing that you're not supposed to say.
no, I think it is instinctual. I I think more often the failures between their principles and their ability to act on it can be chalked up to incompetence and cognitive dissonance more than it can be active duplicity. Also, because as we just went over, women don't seem to function well in the realm of self-awareness. So I'm willing to be charitable in one way and uncharitable in another way by saying it's mostly cognitive dissonance and a clash between instinct and cognition rather than active duplicity. Because the funny thing is, the women that are self-aware enough to admit what they want in defiance of all the feminist gobbledygook don't usually have a problem finding a man. Actually, that's the. In fact, you could call that um, the main problem with modern day dating strategies is when you can admit to yourself what you actually want, when you can bring your conscious mind in line with your instincts, you have no problem acting on them, even in ways that aren't exactly morally permissible. Um, but as long as your instincts and your cognition are at war and you try to side with your cognition over your instinct, you will forever be miserable because you will forever be betraying your abstract principles because your instincts are driving on some level, or you will constantly be flouting your instincts to try and maintain your abstract beliefs, and then you'll be miserable. Or most likely some combination of the two. You'll try to um, follow your instincts, you'll fail because of your intellectual hangups, and you'll try to stick to your intellectual hangups, and you'll fail because your instincts will have the last word one way or the other. Both of these things
And the
can
thing is,
simultaneously be true.
well, the thing is,
And then you wind up in
well, I
limbo
do.
of I
Well,
tried
I will admit
everything
to
and
your
now I'm
point.
ruined.
I will admit to your point that there probably is a large majority of women that are suffering from cognitive dissonance. The thing is, though, that there are so many women suffering from this that, like, they're all trying to chase the top 10% Giga Chad men, which means that the men never have to necessarily pick any of the women. They could just sleep with them and then go get another one.
Well, I I I have a theory about that, and it kind of relates to some of the things I've already talked about so far in this episode. Um, I've noticed this phenomena I like to call the blank male human because what you ultimately get when you combine female hypergamy with modern resources to act on said hypergamy and the old school mainstay of the real man syndrome is they actually don't think they're being unreasonable because they actually think in their heart of hearts that the only men that exist that are actually qualifiable as men are the top of the 80-20 rule or the 1% of said 80-20 rule. They
Yeah.
actually do think that men who maybe, male humans that don't fit their ideal of what a real man is are just blank male humans. That's why they can say, oh, he was a
They
boy,
treat
oh,
them
he
like they're
wasn't a real man, and
NPCs.
etc.
They treat them like they're NPCs. You know that they're there, but they are completely
They're
they
they're
don't
not they're
count
not
as an
eligible
actual.
for interaction as a player. That's exactly it.
Yes.
It they're essentially just spare male units that might be out there, or even just again that's why I call it the blank male human, because they actually do believe that those 20% of men or those 1% of 20% of men are the only actual men, and any male human who doesn't obtain that standard of maleness or manhood or masculinity is actually just not properly male. They failed at being men. And that's also in some reasons why I think in 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 their calculus, in their framework, the feminist ideal the feminist ideological equality thing does make a kind of sense. Because if you consider the only actual men to be that percentage of men, then it's perfectly legitimate for those women to say, I want equality to men. They don't mean male humans. They mean real men. They want equality to the real men, i.e., they want every single woman, every single female human to be on the same level as your Elon Musk's, your Mark Zuckerberg's, your Hollywood superstars, your professional athletes, and so on, because those are the only ones they consider to be men. And that's also why they can have this understanding of men, because if you consider the only men, the only actual men, the only valid men to be in that top 20% or that top 1% of 20%, then you'll find that a lot of those men actually are the narcissistic alpha male cluster B having douchebags that women think that all men are. It's not because they have this thing where they just can't understand that male humans don't have it as perfectly as those men. It's that those men are the only men they consider men, and everyone else is either a failed man or they must secretly have those proclivities anyway. They're just not as good at it.
Yeah, like there's a saying, "You are who you choose to associate with," and if women are constantly picking these type of men, then the problem isn't even necessarily the men, because if if women chose en masse different kinds of men, these men wouldn't behave this way.
If you select high achievers and all of the high achievers have narcissistic personality disorder to one degree or another, then you're going to, and you disbelieve that there are any other valid men who are not high achievers, then you're going to come up to the conclusion that all of the men are narcissistic high achievers, and therefore there must be a patriarchy, and therefore every single female human will not be free until every single one of them is equal to the top 1% without actually having to engage in the activities that the top 1% have to engage in to obtain that wealth, because they consider that action, that attempt at meritocracy, to be the flawed part. They think that a true utopia is one in which every female human can aspire to the same level as Mark Zuckerberg or Bezos or Musk or whomever without the work, because the work is actually what turns them into narcissists in the feminist mindset.
You know, this, when we were talking about you know feminism and basically women, you know, because we live in a gynocentric society, women are able to, go out into the streets and talk about their problems and raise a ruckus about it and basically um, protest until like NGOs get involved, government gets involved on their behalf. But men don't do that. And there's actually a quote in here about that. It says, "It's hard to position a movement where the territory is so intimate. Men, after all, can't exactly gather on the White House lawn and demonstrate for their right to cry in public or claim their lost father's love. These, it would seem, are matters for the therapist's couch, private matters."
And then, of course, you run into the problem of modern psychology is so lousy with the various social justice ideologies that if you have any amount of reasonable self respect as a man, you're going to get classed with narcissistic personality disorder or other cluster B, just because modern psychology has a very hard time telling the difference between a healthy degree of self-respect and pathological narcissism. And
And the thing
especially
is,
if you happen to be a man with the wrong beliefs, because we have decided as a society and as an aristocracy what the valid beliefs are. So if you have self-respect and you have the wrong beliefs, then you must be psychologically damaged, e.g., narcissism.
and the thing is, if men were to do this, who would be their biggest detractors? Women, because despite how much every woman says they want their man to be open and talk to them and share with them, the moment that the man does, the woman will start to view that as a chink in the armor,
Again,
as a sign of weakness.
it's a difference between instinct and intellectualism or cognition. And what's more, here's the other niggling little detail that always comes up, because whenever you point this out to feminist women or even extremely gynocentric feminine women, they say, "Well, yes, we want you to express yourselves, but we want you to do it in the right way." Because this is the other thing: the, the feminist body of theories has a blind spot. They want men to express their feelings, but they also only believe that the feminine way of expressing feelings is the correct way of expressing feelings. And they have an ideological and philosophical proclivity that says anything that is tied to physical reality or logic, logical mechanics, is broken and limited and part of what makes masculinity bad. So the fact that men express their vulnerabilities in the form of, I don't have this thing, or I don't have this practical thing that I need, is in and of itself them expressing their emotions wrong in this mindset. The only way that men are supposed to express their feelings is the way that feminine people, and I do say feminine people because there are men who do very much express their um, emotions in a very feminine way, and then there are women who express their emotions in a very masculine way. It's more of a masculine versus feminine thing than it is even a men versus women thing. But in the feminist theory and in the extremely gynocentric traditionalist theory, to express your emotions correctly, there is only one method. And if you express your emotions in any other method, then that means that you're still tying yourself to the thing that doesn't let you express your emotions, which means you're doing it wrong.
You know, she did actually go through a male therapy group um, when she was disguised as a man, and the guys there, they didn't, like, again, fully trust her because they almost certainly sensed that she was hiding something from them. But she said that a lot of these guys were filled with a lot of aggression, and she mentioned specifically this one guy who was basically, for his therapy, he was basically like um destroying an effigy of his wife. And she goes to mention that this guy would never hurt his wife. That's his wife. He loves her, but like, women have a habit of getting under men's skin very well, and this guy, he just needed to get the aggression out somehow.
And here's the thing. The reason I think why men translate their pain into aggression is because aggression allows you to fuel action, and action allows for practical solutions. And that's one of the reasons why feminist and extremely gynocentric traditionalist women do not understand why men are aggressive, because they
I think
actually
another
consider the desire of men to find practical solutions rather than abstract emotional ones to be the problem.
I think the reason why men feel pain into aggression is from, even from like a biological practical standpoint, where if you destroy the thing that is pissing you off, it can't piss you off anymore.
Again, if you find a practical solution to a problem and fuel your ability to account for that solution with aggression, then the problem is solved. And once again, we might find ourselves in a situation where it ultimately goes back to evolution. Because what were the strategies of male humans and female humans in the bygone Stone Age days? The female's approach was to emote as much as she could so that the male humans would then be directed at her problems and use their practical solutions and their aggression to solve said problem. Whereas men, they didn't have a secondary gender to defer to when they had an emotion. So their emotions were more often translated into aggression, which enabled practical action, which enabled practical solutions, which enabled the end of the problem. And the main problem that feminist and extremely gynocentric women have is they want men to view their problems in the abstract and only in the abstract, because tying things to physical reality or straightforward logic is the problem. And the feminist utopian vision of the future is one in which everyone emotes in the abstract, and because of the strength of the emotional abstraction, there are no practical problems. But as long as men keep tethering their problem solution or problem solving to practical matters, feminist and extremely gynocentric women will view the men as doing it wrong. Because even acknowledging that there are physical problems or physical constraints is a childish delusion that men have, according to feminist and extremely traditionalist gynocentric logic.
I think another thing we need to consider is that while I'm while there are absolutely valid reasons for structuring our society in a way that inhibits us from our more primitive and instinctual impulses, those impulses are not psychological, they're biological. And so even if you say you cannot do these things, the urges to do them still exist.
And
And so
and more,
basically you're a guy left standing there holding a bomb saying you're not allowed to defuse it in a safe way. And I'm like, okay, then what the hell am I supposed to do with it? So we need to find a way that where we can respect the reasons why society restricts us while also finding an outlet for the biological urges that we have had since first left the caves. Because
time
uh,
immemorial, basically,
yeah,
as long as as long as we've been primates, pretty much.
yeah,
Um,
because society has advanced, but human beings have not evolved to match that society. We are still, biologically speaking, the same as we have always been.
because the human evolutionary strategy was so effective, we solved most of the factors that used to lead to um, leaps forward in evolution. Well, unfortunately, that means that our society has evolved to a point where it doesn't, um, where it isn't conducive to our instinctual parameters, but our instinctual parameters have no incentive to change because we got rid of all the evolutionary factors that would have caused us to change. Um, However, I do want to point out that there might be a spanner in your works somewhere, in the sense that I don't really think that our societies are meant to limit us from being the beings that we were in the cave. I think that the beings we were in the cave were what caused us to found the societies in the way we did. And that's why I think we need to address the other side of the equation, i.e., the men's rights half, finally, because um, the thing of it is, we created a society back in the Stone Age, and it was very advanced for the Stone Age, and that's why we didn't need to change it for a long time. But sometime in the last couple hundred years, we've made changes to it on the female side, because the instinctive approach for human societies is give women whatever luxuries you can afford to give them. Our societies have prospered, so we've given women more luxuries, and we've even gone so far as to call them rights, which probably was ultimately a good thing, but only giving it to half of the human race was not. And now we have a situation where we are finally in a place where we could function as a society without the carrot and the stick. But we only got rid of the stick for women, and we appear to have gotten rid of the carrot for men. So maybe, just like the previous century was dominated by the women's rights movement and or the civil rights movement, maybe finally we can let the robots do what we used to have men do and give men the human rights that we discovered a century ago for women. And then we can finally be equal under the law and culturally. But what won't bring us equality is give the women's more things while making things infinitely harder for men.
Thing is, if women want um, better men, like men with more resources, there's one thing that they have to do: leave the workforce.
Select those men.
Because here's the thing: like wages overall went down when women started working, and therefore flooded the workforce. Meaning that when you
They
have more
doubled it.
people facing
They basically doubled the workforce, which made labor cheaper by virtue of there being more of it, and made employers and buyers more selective about who they could afford to hire.
exactly, and it used to be that a man could support a family on his own income, because that's the way it was. Like men were the owners and women took care of the home, but when women started being the earners too, like they'll start paying. Okay, why do we pay someone like for this job with this salary when there are women who are just entering the workforce, happy to take any job they basically can get, and um, they're willing to take a salary for less money necessarily.
Well, it's more than that. One of the reasons why women are willing to take less money is not because they're more frugal or because they want less. Certainly, it's not because women want less. It's because women know on an instinctual level, if nothing else, that whatever money she gets from working is supposed to be supplementary because she's supposed to get money from other significant men in her life, be it her father, her brothers, or her husband. And that's why I always giggle whenever anyone brings up a wage gap, because it goes back to one of the oldest jokes I've ever heard, which is, you know, uh, boy asks his sister, why do you always have money and I never have money, despite the fact that I work two jobs and you don't? And the sister responds, it's because I have a boyfriend and you have a girlfriend. Namely, women get supplementary income from the men in their lives, and so they can afford to take less because whatever they end up getting will be supplemented, at least in theory, and in most cases, by the men in their lives. If men weren't obliged to give women their money like they have been for centuries, then women probably would honestly be earning more because, again, A, gynocentric species that prefers women over men, but also B, because women would want more because women have always been the procurers of resources and luxuries. That's why women are hypergamous. It's because their job, evolutionarily, is to find the best resources and the best things, which can include driving men to procure those things for her.
Yeah, but now they're taking resources for themselves while also expecting men to have vastly more resources than they were
Yeah.
previously supposed to have.
I'm going to replace you in the workforce, but if you don't find some way of supplementing my income so that I can afford luxuries, then you're out on your ass because I have no need of you.
See, by the end of the experiment, for 18 months, um, she was really starting to experience depression because she couldn't reconcile like pretending to be a man for all that time when she was actually a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And when faced with the reality of what men go through and what women go through, she obviously would much prefer to be a woman.
Gee, I wonder who could have warned her about this.
And
And to be fair, I'm glad that this exists because it confirms, or at least is strong evidence in favor of the idea that the patriarchy of feminist imagining and the gender dynamics of feminist imagining are not only wrong, but in many ways directly fucking inverted.
I mean, she only went a fraction of what a lot of guys goes through. She didn't even get divorced or have to go through family court.
I mean, that's probably good because despite the little bit of Schadenfreude I'm getting from her finding this out, I wouldn't want her to experience those things. Because in a sane world, no one would have to go through those things. But um, we don't exactly we and I hate to pull this card again, but unironically, the more I look at the situation for men in this day and age, the more parallels I can find between the men in this day and age, all of them, which includes the men of color, and what black people went through during Jim Crow. And just like the correct solution to the Jim Crow era and the Reconstructionist era South was the civil rights movement, far be it from me, but especially given that we now have automation on the horizon, where we could have robots do the things that humans honestly should never have been doing to begin with, why don't we just have a men's rights movement wherein we invite men to indulge in the same human rights that we incontrovertibly discovered for women? Because I would agree that many of the rights that we gave to women in the previous century are actually rights. The main problem with them is that if you extend something you acknowledge to be a universal human right to only half of the humans, you're going to wind up with a broken system. Because something that is supposed to be applied universally is not being applied universally, it's being applied selectively.
Yeah, and to be fair, if a real men's rights movement were to take place nowadays, I'm pretty sure the system would do everything in its power to suppress it.
I mean, you say if, I mean, there is one and they are. So I think that hypothesis is so confirmed that it's not even a hypothesis anymore. The men's rights movement has existed since like what, the late 80s, early 90s, and only really got honest to goodness going at the advent of the internet communities around it, which was in like 20, 2009 through like 2013. And they, and how many hit pieces? How many herder, toxic masculinity herder, the entitlement of men, the misogyny of men? How many of those movements have there been? Because I've been around a time or two in these communities, and there are few people on this earth that are more tarnished than the manosphere, and in particular the men's rights movement. Because honestly, when you get right down to it, I think feminists find MGTOWs and PUAs at least more understandable than the men's rights movement. They just
Uh,
don't they just don't have a point of reference whatsoever for the men's rights movement because it's completely outside
I
the
would
human
argue that
paradigm.
women do not understand MGTOW at all. They
No,
understand
I mean
PUA sometimes.
they don't really understand any of them, but I'm saying in terms of how they're reacted to. Either they're treated better than men's rights, or they're unnecessarily thrown into the same category as men's rights because people can't tell the difference usually.
We're at like almost an hour 15, so let's end it here. This was a really good discussion, especially going through the bits about the documentary. It's nice that a woman was able to do that experience and actually get a actual understanding of what life as a man is like. Though, like I said, it wasn't
Yeah.
really 100% complete because of a lot of things that she didn't go through.
And if we ever do find ourselves on the other end of the men's rights movement, i.e., after men's rights has won, like the civil rights movement did, or the gay rights movement did, I fully expect that Norah Vincent will be right up there with people like Kathy J. and Earl Silverman and Aaron Pitsey as historical heroes of the men's rights movement era. And I hope to God we do. I I don't know if I will live to see the end of it, but I hope to God at some point in the annals of history yet to come, the men's rights movement will be regarded along the same lines as the civil rights movement. I really hope we get there. And I hope that people like Norah Vincent and Kathy J and Aaron Pitsey and Warren Farrell and Earl Silverman are regarded in the same way as a Rosa Parks or a Martin Luther King. Someday, I hope.
I hope so too. Hello, everybody. I've been Mystery.
I have been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator. We have been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.